From 2011 until 2025, Neptune was in Pisces, and I'm calling this the era of the narrative, meaning that individuals and society as a whole went all in on finding meaning and connection to stories that they tell themselves or stories that they told other people. And a story does not have to be based in reality. And in fact, we have seen a disconnect from objective facts and for the search for what is truth in favor of narratives that are attempting to idealize what may or may not be happening in the real world. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down what effects Neptune had on individuals and society during this 13-year period of time. And the first thing I'm going to do is give an overview of what Pisces is as a sign. And we're going to connect that with what we learned in the previous video about what Neptune does to a sign, which is essentially attempting to connect as deeply as possible to the experience of that sign in a search for meaning, and that develops this kind of longing for a complete fulfillment with that sign. And because the longing is so intense to have complete fulfillment, it ends with dissatisfaction and the creation of illusions and delusions about the experience of that sign. So understanding the Neptune in Pisces era is going to be very important for us to wrap our heads around where we're going in the era that's upcoming, which is Neptune in Aries, which is going to be the next video. And these are two very different signs, and they bring about starkly different results, which we're going to discover. Pisces is the end of a cycle, and Aries is the beginning of a new cycle. So in order to understand what's coming ahead with Neptune and Aries, it's really important to understand where we're at right now and what we've come out of from the Neptune and Pisces era. So the exact dates were April 4th, 2011, when Neptune entered Pisces for the first time. It dipped back into Aquarius on August 5th, 2011, and then on February 4th, 2012, it re-entered Pisces, where it remained for the next 13 years. So here are the central themes that I've developed to describe this period, and we're going to discuss them one by one as we go through this video. So the first is the longing for an idealized personal narrative via the rise of smartphones and social media addiction. The second is moral relativism. The third is the de-emphasis on objective truth and blurring the lines of facts and what is a fact, which gave rise to the discussions about disinformation and misinformation, and that becoming a very hot topic throughout this period of time and even until today. The fourth theme is idealism of the coexist ideology, which led to mass immigration and the mixing of all cultures into a single whole, or the attempt to do that. The fifth is the free flow of knowledge and podcasts becoming the dominant way to obtain information. And the sixth theme is a broad spiritual revival, kind of a New-Ageism, and the deep desire to connect with a broad understanding of collective consciousness beyond religion. So in order to understand these themes, it's really critical that we break down what Pisces is. So zodiac signs, what they are, they're fields of experience, and we all have every zodiac sign. We all have the potential to experience that zodiac sign. And that means even if we don't have a planet in that sign is still a part of our lives, though it won't be as pronounced as much as if it had a planet within it. But it's important to remember that when planets, especially the three outer planets, are transiting over a zodiac sign, the characteristics of that sign become very pronounced on collective humanity in a very subtle and longer term way than when the inner planets are transiting a sign. So first of all, Pisces is the most nebulous of all of the zodiac signs. And I like to use that term nebulous because it denotes this kind of inexact, always morphing and changing quality. a place of unlimited variety, you could say. And the best metaphor for Pisces, which you should keep in your mind throughout this video and in general, which helps to understand the analysis that I'm going through, that metaphor is that Pisces is the ocean, which is a place of unlimited variety and variety of life forms and this incredible amount of diversity within it. And the ocean is the deepest place in the earth. It has the most depth to it, and it contains so many mysteries of these deep areas of the earth, sunken civilizations, animals and fish we've never seen before. And most of the ocean is completely pitch black. No sunlight reaches there. And you can think of what metaphors you can derive from that idea, the darkness, the hidden areas of our consciousness. So the ocean is this primordial and infinite source of all life. And with the ocean, we really have to surrender ourselves to a sense of wonder, to its vastness, and accept and understand that there's this infinite possibilities contained in the ocean and contained within ourselves. And those infinite possibilities mean infinite intellectual possibilities, but also infinite spiritual possibilities, the ability that anything is possible. So in modern Western astrology, Pisces is ruled by Neptune, and Neptune is the god of the ocean and the ruler of the ocean. But in Vedic astrology, the sign Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, which is the planet of philosophy, of morality, and expanding one's awareness and knowledge to eventually reach a spiritual realizations about the realm we live in and how the universe is structured, but in a very open way and not a very defined way, as we'll talk about in a second about Jupiter's other sign, Sagittarius. So Pisces, via its ruler, Jupiter, contains the latent ability of people to bring knowledge into abstract and symbolic forms. And again, that word nebulous, to be able to understand things on an abstract and less definite material level. And also to see deep underlying patterns about the universe, which are meant to give us, ideally, deeper purpose and meaning to our lives, to help expand our awareness into a more inclusive way of seeing the world. I'm one drop in the ocean, and all of the ocean of experience contains many drops. That's the classic metaphor for it. But we play a part, and we're all interconnected in that way. So Pisces is the latent ability to think about and contemplate those things. Jupiter, the other sign that Jupiter rules, is Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is the hierarchy of knowledge, which means that there is logic to justice. And Sagittarius is the sign of the rulers of society, whether they be political rulers or religious rulers, who have a moral mandate to guide other people towards prosperity and creating abundance in their life based on the wisdom that they have. So Sagittarius is the Jupiterian understanding of knowledge applied externally to the external world around us. But Pisces, on the other hand, is about exploring our inner world and discovering truths that already exist within ourselves, to discover the wisdom that we already contain within ourselves. And this is achieved through contemplation and surrender to higher powers. These are very important Pisces characteristics, the idea of surrender and the ability to contemplate about these abstract things. And so ultimately, Pisces is the sign of liberating ourselves from material life, and in order to expand our consciousness. And the reason why Venus, the planet of relaxation, the planet of the good things in life, is exalted in Pisces is because Pisces is not a place of work. People like to say, I have to do the inner work. And that is true in a certain sense, but there's the highest level of Pisces experience is samadhi, which is the complete surrender to every individual moment, to completely live in, you could say, a blissful state of the exact moment. And that is pure relaxation. It's the healthiest thing that your body can do to rejuvenate itself. So Pisces is this place of being able to completely surrender to each moment and to incorporate the vastness of experience in each moment. And an important part about Pisces, which is really going to be very important and come into play about what's happening to society, what happened to society during Neptune's transit, is that Pisces is the sign of moral relativity, which is not like Sagittarius, which is the sign of logical and direct and a systematized ethical framework. So an unhealthy expression of Sagittarius would be extreme black and white thinking. And sometimes that is useful. Black and white thinking is an aspect of humanity. It's an aspect of experience. Some things are just right and wrong. And Pisces has that, Sagittarius is that way of thinking about morality. But Pisces is the experience of the grayness of morality, that an action in one context can be considered the right thing to do, but that exact same action in a different context is the wrong thing to do. So Pisces embraces ambiguity, and it's our ability to rely on intuition rather than logic to understand the world and to be able to play with the different contexts and to see problems in morality, so to say. And that not everything in life can be treated as black and white. And it's also our ability to see the profound mysteries of life that can't be described logically. We understand them, but we don't do that through the use of our logic. We do that through the use of sensation, of feeling, and intuition. So the power of Pisces' latent ability, is to embrace the mystery and wonder of the world through direct experience of the divine, through otherworldly or supernatural experiences, and to achieve transcendence of material life through them. Some people can do that without the use of, some people can do that. We're called to do that. Other people have to, an unhealthy expression of Pisces is to use outside substances to do that, to affect your consciousness. And you could say plant medicines help to get to those otherworldly experiences. Some people fall into modes of addiction, say just smoking too much marijuana or alcoholism. What you're doing is you're dissociating from reality. Pisces is a part of us that dissociates from reality, but how do we do that? There's many variety of ways that you can do that. A healthy Pisces strives to do that, but doesn't need the aid of what can be addictive substances or need to kind of, we have the ability to achieve transcendence latent within us. We don't need things outside of us to bring us there. It's about how well we're able to train ourselves to do that. So I don't want to go too far into that get sidetracked in that tangent, but that's what the calling of Pisces is to do, is to contemplate and to remove ourselves from reality in a healthy way that helps us to grow as individuals, to transcend our daily lives. And Pisces is really the realm of our subconsciousness, and it's our dream life and the ability to create ideals. And that would mean the best possible situation that we can imagine. Pisces, you could also say, stimulates our imagination to be able to entertain infinite possibilities. And what Pisces does, it's this ability to stimulate introversion and the desire, and has this desire to dive into the depths of quiet contemplation. That's a key word, contemplation. That's the world of Pisces. And as I just kind of mentioned about addiction, it's also the place of escapism and the potential to become addicted to escaping from our practical material reality. The opposite sign of Pisces is Virgo, which is strict material concerns and problems that we have to deal with in the real world. There needs to be a balance. We can't completely escape all the time, but we can't always be in a practical material realm. We have to balance those two. There's a trade-off between those two. And so to sum up, essentially Pisces is the sign where all of life's experiences are mixing together and they morph within one another through the ability to contemplate about them. In the same way that all life begins and ends with the ocean. So we use that phrase, the ocean of consciousness, and we're all a drop in this ocean. And that is the perfect metaphor for Pisces And when we take that, we can see, we're able to see and understand life from a vast holistic perspective, and that everything is completely interconnected in some way, shape, or form. We're all one. And so that's why Pisces is a planet, is the sign of achieving that ability to connect with oneself with the oneness of all existence, which is a deep spiritual realization, which gives a sense of bliss, but also a sense of deep understanding that we're not alone. And so while the ocean is very calm on the surface, it's also the most powerful force in the world, and it can toss any human being like a throw pillow. You could be the biggest, strongest person, but if you go into a storm in the ocean, the waves are just going to toss you around. So there's a respect that we have to have to the ocean in all kinds of ways. And the respect that we have for all of life is that we can become overwhelmed by life very easily. Life is infinite. So there's a kind of danger, you could say, to Pisces. And you can easily get lost in this ocean. You can easily get lost in your own inner world and be swayed into ambiguity and create illusions that aren't attached to the practical reality, and to confuse the real and the unreal, and to mistake your own subjectivity with objective material facts. And so that leads us into some of the problems that we're going to be discussing now of what society really went through. I'm going to start with the problematic areas, but you can see that this danger that Pisces had, society really entered into dangerous waters because of that intense ambiguity and mixture, and the desire for mixing everything together and seeing everything as indistinguishable from anything else. And that's more of an unhealthy way of looking at Pisces. So we're going to go into the first theme now about Neptune's transit. And what Neptune was doing is, first of all, creating this deep longing and desire for the profound experience of Pisces, everything I just outlined, and to be completely fulfilled by this field of experience. So that first theme is the longing for an idealized personal narrative via the rise of smartphones and social media addiction. So that idealized narrative was manifested because of these technologies. And so this era from 2011 to 2025 was the era of the narrative, and more specifically the era of the personal narrative. And this was brought about by this explosion of the use of smartphones. And in 2012 was the year that I graduated from university. And at that time, having a smartphone was kind of reserved to rich people. Some people would have them, but they were really chic at that time. But they were just starting to come out and become more widely available and affordable. And by 2014, it was essentially standard, at least in the United States, to have a smartphone. So really quickly, you went from a Motorola Razr, as you could get by pretty easily, to the point by 2015 you almost had to have a smartphone. And these days, I used a dumb phone for years up until 2020. I didn't have a smartphone. I used like a Motorola, a little tiny, like it looked like a BlackBerry, and it was really hard. I did it on purpose, but it was really hard to live with just that kind of phone, because essentially now you have to have a smartphone mandated by the government. There are so many things that you can't do which are required by the government for you to do without the use of a smartphone. And for example, where I live here in Brazil, to take even money out of the ATM, in some banks, you don't just put your card and type in your PIN code. You have to actually put in your card, type in your PIN code, and then correlate through the app on your phone and type in another code there into the ATM. So you can't even get out money without a smartphone from banks. And so what smartphones have done is they've taken over the world. And I used to say that that's the revolution. That's what dominated the world, were smartphones. And they're ruling our lives in so many different ways. And I like to point out the amazing prescience of Stanley Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey, in that film, the black monolith is this powerful monument which has this power to change consciousness, and it projects onto humanity a new stage of development. It's this massive mystery. And take notice that the monolith is nearly the exact dimensions of a smartphone. And as a side note, Stanley Kubrick included the importance of the alignment of celestial phenomenon to the development of consciousness. So those are really interesting. But you can see the correlations between the black monolith, our smartphones, and the changing of consciousness. So the rollout of the smartphone into our daily lives gave the Piscean effect of isolating people into their own inner worlds, the ocean of unlimited possibilities, which is the internet itself, and at your fingertips 24/7. So there's always this way to dive in to your own personal world. So when Neptune was in Aquarius from 1998 to 2011, the internet was becoming ubiquitous throughout all of society, and this was the peak of globalization, external globalization, you could say. And it had this Aquarian trait of mass humanity connecting via a tool or a technology, and which was computers, and of course the internet. But with Pisces from 2011 to 2012, that mass connection to the world started to give that isolating and introverting force because of the smartphones. So it went from the internet to smartphones, and people dove their faces into their smartphones, and that gave this introverting effect. And it became this ultimate escape into one's own private universe, which is an extremely Piscean quality. And of course, addiction to escapism became the natural consequence of that. So Neptune had this effect. Neptune in general has this effect of dissolving our understanding of reality. Again, to see the nebulousness of reality, to dissolve our ability to see things so concrete that things are always changing. Neptune does that. And it becomes difficult for a person to ascertain what is real or what is false. So you see a lot of correlations with what Neptune and Pisces are. And that's why Western astrology says that Neptune rules Pisces. But Neptune having this dissolving quality of not being so certain, and the diving into an experience completely, and diving into the introverted world of Pisces, has resulted in the skyrocketing of loneliness. They call it the loneliness epidemic. And that is the Piscean introversion into oneself and seeking complete fulfillment through that. So nowadays people prefer to stay at home on their device rather than go out and do traditional social activities, because their single universe, their phone, is plenty for them. There's so much that they can do in there. It's infinite. And so what happened was this creation of everyone's own personal illusion via the nonstop use of social media. And social media is created this, or it creates for a person this phantom digital self, which is an illusion about who we see ourselves to be that we're projecting out onto the world. And so everyone is devising their own personal narrative in this isolated world of their smartphone or their computer. So Neptune in Pisces created this longing for deep Piscean experience of locating, quote unquote, truth in one's subjective inner world. And to make things worse, algorithms are curating an individualized take on reality and showing us what it believes that we want to see. And so this has made it even harder for people to come to collective, definable ideas of what is true or false. And so this first major theme is about the isolation effect into a subjective world of illusion and creating a personalized narrative that may be completely disconnected from reality in an objective way. And so the larger social implication of this era of the narrative is that because the internet is not the real world, the narratives that are crafted and spread through smartphones and social media are similarly detached from the real world. There is always an element of it just being a story. And the stories being told about the world have become more important than reality itself. And so the narratives about politics, about conflicts, about culture, about science, about sociology, we've gradually seen them become detached from objective reality. So Neptune in Pisces disconnected people from concrete material life and swept the world into the nebulous worlds of ever-changing reality. And often that became a way for people to be seeking validation for whatever their dreams or their ideals or their philosophies were. So the narratives created is this kind of self-fulfilling way of desiring to be validated, creating a narrative about oneself or about how one believes the world works, and it being detached is all an attempt to say, yes, something is true, this is true, I have a subjective truth, but getting lost in that world completely. And again, just kind of not having something to hold on to, it's like being in the middle of the ocean without a boat or without a rock, something stabilizing the narrative into something that is unfixable, the rock being objective truth. And of course, a huge topic is we've seen the rise of AI in the past few years, which has only furthered this process because the AI hallucinates. And it's been shown to make up information. And then of course the ability to just create images with AI, completely not real, has no basis in fact. It's just a computer generated image or video. So this has further advanced this idea that nothing is real, at least in the internet. And now any video or any photo can be fake. We don't know. And this, you could say, is kind of the culmination of Neptune and Pisces, the artificial intelligence revolution. And I'm not going to dive more into AI right now, and I'm going to reserve that for the next video of Neptune and Aries, because the culmination of Neptune and Pisces essentially was AI, this artificial world, artificial understanding of reality. Where are we going with that in the era to come? And as a preview, that era of Neptune and Aries, I'm going to be calling the era of the rejection of the narrative, or the breaking down of the narrative in general. And it's going to be the time when the rubber hits the road and the illusioned world of Pisces begins to break down, and the real situation can no longer be ignored. But we're going to dive into that much more in the following video on Neptune and Aries. So the next theme of Neptune in Pisces is the rise of moral relativism. And so we saw this so much with the idea of my truth and your truth rather than the truth. And this is the trademark Piscean characteristic of moral subjectivity or moral relativism, as I mentioned earlier about what Pisces does, is this grayness of the understanding of ethics. So instead of principles to live by, we see this blending of principles into vague and very contradictory belief systems. So I believe that there is an important value in seeing the grayness of ethical questions about things. And that's how Pisces can elevate our understanding of morality, and to be able to incorporate complexity and nuance rather than just the black and white, pure right or wrong look at how the world works. That's a fundamentalist way of seeing morality. That's what a fundamentalist religion does. It's either right or wrong, no exceptions. But there's a healthy way, and so that we don't want to be black and white. We want to see grayness and complexity and nuance. That is what a positive moral relativity is. But what the moral relativity that we saw emerge was the unhealthy, the hypocritical and selective morality. And I think this is epitomized by the woke identity politics. And essentially what woke is identity politics, that you are inseparable from your physical characteristics, and that determines your behavior essentially. And so in this kind of paradigm, right and wrong thinking or right and wrong behavior is defined by immutable physical characteristics instead of the actual behavior itself. So who did the behavior superseded the behavior. And so what this did is that morality became extremely confused and politicized and incredibly complicated from a delusional way, in a very delusional way. And so just as a quick example, this kind of moral relativism says that it's okay to discriminate against a majority group, but it's not okay to discriminate against a minority group. So that is one of their definitions. So if I went to China, I would be a minority. I can discriminate against Chinese people because they're the majority. And they couldn't discriminate against me because I'm the minority. But the fundamental moral question and what the morally relativistic problem is that they're concentrating on who is doing the discrimination. Rather, it should be about the act of the discrimination itself and about the context of the situation, not about the physical characteristics of the person. So morality took on this very unhealthy Piscean nebulousness, this quality of this morphing and contradictory, eventually lost and completely impractical quality, and unable to define a solid workable paradigm of what is right or wrong. But the elevated understanding of moral subjectivity is that context and intention matters. Morality is gray, but in a very subtle and intricate way. And it's not based on the immutable characteristics, the physical characteristics of a person's identity. But what we saw is Neptune attempting to create this complete and deep longing for a total fulfillment in moral relativism. And what it did was dissolve the Western world's understanding of what morality is. It's been lost and discarded and completely confused in a very intense way. And it's gotten to the point that it's become very fundamentalist. The idea of physical characteristics becoming the delineation of the moral relativism is that physical characteristics determine whether something is right or wrong. And it's become fundamentalist because you have to accept that, or you're going to be canceled, or you can't critique it, or you're going to lose your job. And so, ironically, it's taken on that unhealthy Sagittarian quality, the other sign ruled by Jupiter, of fundamentalist thinking about everything is relative. So it's become very confused, and we've seen that during this era really come into prominence. And so what Neptune was doing in Pisces was it was seeking total fulfillment from it seeks total fulfillment from certain aspects of a sign. And in this was seeking total fulfillment from the grayness of morality, to the point that morality dissolved in meaning. And it became shrouded in ever-changing and morphing understanding of what is right and wrong. And to the point where people are asking, how did we even get to this point? And I criticize a lot of the left wokeism, but you can really see it from all sides of the political spectrum. How did we get to this point of the confusion about what is even right and wrong on a basic societal level? And this is the key feature of that Neptune does. It gives the craving of an experience in a sign in such a deep and fulfilling way. But in the process, that experience becomes dissolved and it loses all previous meanings. And things become confused and illusions are created in that confusion. And the result is dissatisfaction. That's another important quality that is often attributed to Neptune, because we can't have complete fulfillment and achieve complete and deep meaning in a single part of life, in a single sign or a single experience. And we need all of the signs in balance. And Neptune really pushes fulfillment in one kind of experience. And in that is all of the change that Neptune is initiating, and all the redefinitions make fulfillment essentially impossible. And what we're going to see in the next era of Neptune in Aries is going to be more, in regards to morality, is going to be about might makes right. And we already can kind of see that in our world nowadays, even for the past centuries. But people who have the gold make the rules. The golden rule. And what this is saying is that when Neptune enters into Aries, there's going to be the ability for the people wanting deep longing and seeking deep fulfillment through the use of force, and just say, when the rubber hits the road, I have a certain power and I achieve meaning through the raw power that I have. And this isn't entirely negative. It's usually interpreted as entirely negative because we think about how governments essentially do that, or large powerful institutions or armies. But it's this moving away from the nebulous and ever-changing ideals and that subjectivity into the era of this emphasis on the exertion of power regardless of one's ideas of moral compass or one's moral compass. The desire to simply do something because you have the power to do it. And that could lead to coercion, where coercion doesn't matter anymore. At the end of the day, you have a certain power, and are you going to use it or not? It doesn't matter about the ideas and about the ideals that are being created, like Neptune and Pisces. But we're going to dive much more into that kind of might means right, raw power in the following videos on Neptune and Aries. So the next theme is very much related to the previous theme about the rise of moral relativism. And that theme is the de-emphasis on objective truth and the blurring of the lines of what is fact, and the rise of the concepts of misinformation and disinformation. So what's very important to understand about surviving and thriving during any Neptune transit is that Neptune is, you can think of it tipping a balance in a very heavy way to heavily emphasize a sign. And so what we have to do is we have to regain that balance. And so what we need to do is look at the opposite sign that Neptune is transiting and emphasize those characteristics to bring stability to Neptune's longing and heavy emphasis on trying to connect to something greater than ourselves in a particular sign. So that heavy emphasis needs to be balanced with the opposite sign. So with all of the Piscean characteristics that people have been longing to connect with on a very deep level, it came at the expense of Virgo characteristics, the opposite sign of Pisces. So Virgo is factual, direct, undeniable information, and it's the concrete truth of things. It's like, that's why very heavy Virgo people are can be very mathematical and dry people, because math it's either on or off, it's yes or no. It's a direct factual paradigm. It's concrete facts. So with the de-emphasis of Neptune and Pisces, the de-emphasis was on objective truth. And so then objective truth is now up for debate. So there was this loss of grounding in finite reality. And Virgo is an earth sign, and grounding ourselves into a pure and inarguable truth. And so an example that I like to use is the question of, is there such thing as objective truth, is to say, well, you see that object in the sky, the sun or the moon, can you stop it from being on the horizon today? All life on earth recognizes that that's the sun in the sky. That's up there giving life to all of creation. That's objectively true. It's there. You could say it's not there, but it is there. So no matter how much you want to deny that it's there, it's still there. So that means that objective truth exists. The question is what are objective truths if we know that they can exist? Because look, can you stop the sun from rising? No, you can't. No matter how much you want to imagine that it's not there, or you want to call the sun the moon or whatever. That's that object. Call it whatever you want. It's there. It's objectively there. So Neptune in Pisces, this era was the time when the narrative was sold that you cannot trust your eyes and ears. When institutions and governments use the terms dis and misinformation, when they use them as blunt force objects to essentially instill doubt into people of what they were reading, watching, or perceiving about the world. You can't be sure of anything. And so it casts doubt of what is objective truths. And people who And people who were using many terms of, say, disinformation, of information that they may not agree with, they're starting to call it the post-truth era. But there is no such thing as post-truth. Truth is always there. There's always going to be truth. But we can become confused about what the truth is. And we can be deliberately confused about what the truth is. And we saw a massive push during this time period to question narratives being passed by governments or powerful institutions that are running society, who rely so much on our, who have an invested interest in to keep this current system in place. And I'll talk a lot more about that when I speak about the positive. I'll talk more about this, about the positive events of Neptune and Pisces. But you see this push for disinformation and misinformation, the attempt to confuse on what we can actually see and perceive, and people are questioning the narrative. You're telling me this is true. There's this overarching thing, but I don't know if that's right or not. Hence the introduction of, oh well, you just listened to misinformation. So the blurring of what could be an objective fact or not. And consider this phenomenon beyond the fight over misinformation and disinformation as well. So Pisces' ruler Jupiter is the force within us that's creating an ideology or a belief system. And Neptune in Pisces created this deep longing to reinforce one's own ideology at the expense of objective truth. We saw some people have that nice balance of that, what is most important to me is if it's true or not, wherever that may lead. But on the other end, ideology, this desire for the intense validation of one's own belief system, the longing to connect deeply with one's own belief system, that they will ignore objective truth. So a great example of this is that editors of some of the most prestigious medical journals have come out and declared that it's possible that more than half of the papers that they published are useless, and that the experiments that they were conducting can't be replicated, or they made major assumptions about very minuscule findings. So what that means is the ideological bent of the researchers clouded their judgment and their ability to objectively analyze the world. That was all sidelined in order to publish findings that validate their belief system, their subjective way of seeing the world, even though, and we're seeing that ideologically based medical research, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And some have been fabricated altogether or manipulated, just like how you can manipulate polling data. Things have all been seeking to validate and find complete validation, or better said, complete fulfillment in one's own belief system. Jupiter, the ruler of Pisces, being the planet of belief system. So Pisces has this important belief system component to it. So take that medical idea. Virgo is the natural sixth sign, and it's an important sign for physical health and overcoming acute sicknesses. So the narratives being pushed of Neptune and Pisces based on ideologies about health and well-being became so much more important than actual physical health, the on-the-ground real nature of how our bodies work. So this dissolution, Neptunian dissolution of objective truth by Neptune in Pisces was, what happens was that it was serving ideological or subjective narratives. And I believe that culminated in the corona narrative, the corona pandemic narrative, which was not allowed to be questioned. It was essentially a belief system that was always changing, and now we see so much of the original narrative being dismantled. But it was based on so many nebulous truths, so to say, and all of those facts were changing at the speed of science, they would say. And it was all basically ideologically driven by those in power. Again, the pushing of a narrative. The era of the narrative reached, again, a culmination with that. This massive story being told that may or may not have anything to do with the objective facts. That's a major culmination point of Neptune in Pisces. So this Neptunian longing to connect with narratives on a deep level was taken to such an extent that, again, connection to reality was completely lost. What was needed was a better, concrete, black and white, true-false analysis, which is the ability of Virgo. Let's just look at what is going on without any ideological bent, just the search for objective truth. That was lost, and that was heavily emphasized. So those who were able to use their objective mind and analyze narratives, analyze what could be true or not, and critique the narrative being pushed were the people who were experiencing a healthy transit of Neptune and Pisces, because they had that balance with Virgo. And they weren't being swept away within vague assumptions of things or drowned by narratives that could not stand up to basic scrutiny. Again, that's what the danger of the Piscean ocean is, to be swept away or to drown in untrue things or illusions. The next major theme of Neptune and Pisces was the idealization of the coexist ideology, which resulted in the justification for mass immigration and the deep but misguided longing to mix any and all cultures or nations or lifestyles into a cohesive whole. Now this, again, is very easily understood when we consider the theme of Neptune when we consider the symbol of Pisces as the ocean, how all life is mixed together in the ocean, or all life ends and begins in the ocean. It's the ocean, it's this holistic place. Everything blends and becomes part of one complete entity, the ocean. So migration has always existed of people moving to different places. But the era between 2011 and 2025, there was this unilateral narrative to import populations into the US and Western Europe, but not the other way around. But now we're also seeing into even parts of Eastern Europe. And again, not the other way around, only to European countries and to the United States. So whatever the initial motivations were, and there are many ideas and thoughts about what those motivations were, the narrative was that all people can mix together into a multicultural utopia. And I believe this is epitomized by a bumper sticker I used to see, I saw when I was young, which was the word coexist with all of the religious symbols together. So healthy immigration is possible for small amounts of people to essentially be absorbed into a larger group, a larger group context. And what is expected is that those people assimilate into that larger group, or you could say in terms of nation, to assimilate into that host nation linguistically and also culturally, to be able to fit in some way, shape, or form. But the Neptunian illusion created in the ocean of Pisces was that the idea that there are no limits necessary for importing new people into a country. And more to the point, when massive numbers of people from a drastically different cultural context, when people from completely different cultures are placed next to one another in large numbers, the illusion is that they're just going to harmoniously coexist. But putting incompatible cultures next to one another does not create cohesion. It does not engender belonging or mutual respect or even mutual political interest. It could, but most of the time it doesn't. What it does is it creates conflicts and wars between those groups who are from wildly different belief systems and cultures. So the narrative is that this is going to be great. Everyone's just going to get along, multicultural utopia. The reality is war and conflict when you throw groups of people into the same physical space together and expect them to just get along when they're totally different people, when they're totally different culturally, linguistically, etc. And so the porous borders, the less regulation and rules, that all cultures are equal, these are unhealthy Piscean ideals. And the idea that all cultures are equal, meaning that all cultures have the same morality and have the same quality, or can create the same results. They don't. They're completely unequal in that way. They have different positive and different negatives to each one. They're not the same. And this Piscean ideal is that we can just ignore concrete reality, that people are completely different, that people who come from completely different climates, cultures, languages, and religions, they can just mix together and just coexist, kind of like how schools of fish can coexist in the same parts of the ocean. But there's conflict in the ocean, and things are all existing in the ocean as a holistic thing, but there are territories and there are groups where certain fish won't go. And so there is this casting of this illusion during this Neptune and Pisces period that everyone would just get along if we just threw everyone in together and said everything's just going to be cohesive and united. And I heard someone say the other day that the narrative of the neoliberal elite institutions that essentially proposed and implemented this policy on a mass level, they basically treat John Lennon's song Imagine as the beginning of history, and that the neoliberal cultural utopian rallying cry of tolerance and kumbaya harmony, history began, the real truth began when John Lennon sang that song. That's how things should always be. Ignoring everything that came before that kind of utopia utopias don't exist in that way. Conflicts happen for a reason, and conflict isn't negative. Someone who I like to listen to says that's the water that we swim in is conflict in life. And so the culmination of that social and governmental experiment during this Neptune and Pisces era between 2011 and 2025 was this narrative to attempt to forget all differences and blend everyone together, and that somehow peace and harmony will be the automatic result. Whether the people who created that narrative believed it or not, whether it was always a divide and conquer tactic from the beginning is another story. That narrative was sold and that narrative was implemented and people believed it. And so this was an extremely idealistic Piscean dream. And at the end of the day, we can now see it. It was that it was a narrative, and it didn't have necessarily anything to do with the reality on the ground, the potential conflicts that can arise from it, and the conflicts that are essentially inevitable. So in the next era of Neptune and Aries, I believe that ethnic and religious wars are completely on the table, and this means the possible breakup and balkanization of the United States, as well as the breakup of the European Union, when individual nations are going to be deciding to prioritize their nations rather than the attempt to assimilate into a massive whole, this gigantic governing body, and prioritizing their own individual nations. So much more about that in the Neptune and Aries video. So what I've been talking about so far has been predominantly negative or troubling trends that have happened while Neptune was in Pisces. But there are two really positive themes that came to fruition during this period between 2012 and 2025. Now, the first of these themes is the massive growth in the free flow of knowledge. And I believe that podcasting became the kind of epitome of this, becoming the dominant way of obtaining information and communication. And you could say also that the realm of YouTube exploding, of being able for an individual person to just speak on the internet and allow that free flow and allow people to access information in a much more decentralized way. So the rise of the internet happened while Neptune was in Aquarius from 1998 to 2011, and the explosion of social media thereafter fundamentally transformed the passage of knowledge from person to person. So social media didn't begin with Neptune in Pisces in around 2011. It was kind of getting on its feet during that time. But it totally revolutionized everything after Neptune went into Pisces. From 2011 on, that's when social media really took over as the dominant form of communication. So I believe that the fruition of this is what you can generally call podcasting, which is basically a person or two or more people sitting down and engaging in extensive free-form conversations and the exchange of ideas. So long, drawn-out interviews, they bring out much more information out into the open, and there's a greater flow of information. And the discussions get much deeper than how information was passed in the era of the corporate media, where you just get little snippets and packages of clips that tell a narrative. Everything is opened up in a kind of podcasting environment. And with regular people creating these shows, there was the development of alternative narratives. And there have been many waves of these kinds of alternative, you could say, bigger narratives that are created. And one of them you can just say is the manosphere. That has become a big talking point. And also you could say the rise of Substack as a platform that doesn't censor its users for not fitting into neat, authorized, prepackaged narratives. You can just say and let your information flow out, and we're not going to tell you that's right or wrong. Just it's ambiguous until someone wants to make a judgment on it. We're just going to let the information flow. And again, this is thanks to Pisces ruler Jupiter, which is the planet of philosophy and the expansion of higher knowledge. So in this time period, Neptune in Pisces, a new media ecosystem was essentially created. And this is refreshing because now all of ideas can be brought out into the open. And everything is now on the table and up for discussion. So now there's an ocean of possible narratives, for better or for worse, but in my opinion, that's better than the cloistered media landscape where only approved narratives have access to the public's opinion. So on the one hand, you have major narratives being sold by the powerful institutions and the heavy emphasis on them, but there is the creation of many more narratives, for better or worse, whether they are, the subjective ideology, but at least now that there's a free flow of the ability to define things in a more freer and looser way, according to what knowledge that you've obtained. And so an offshoot of the free flow of information has been this final theme, which is a broad-based spiritual revival. And in a way you could say a New-Ageism, because New-Ageism is very old. But this period of time, we see rooted in this Neptune and Pisces era, a deep desire for people to connect with collective consciousness that is beyond religious dogma or religious doctrines. So this new ability for the free exchange of thoughts through social media, through video platforms and podcasting, paved the way for the revival of free thinking about the meaning and the nature of human existence and our roles as individuals in the current construct of society and our relationship with the divine in general. And even though the film The Matrix was released in 1999, its core message, the core messages of it really began to sink into the minds of people, into popular culture during this Neptune in Pisces era. So it's essentially the phenomenon of, quote, waking up to the false constructs of modern life. Or you could say exiting Plato's cave or exiting the Matrix. And so this spiritual revival, it didn't just suddenly begin with Neptune and Pisces, but it became much more widely sought out. And I would say that this opening up of all these different spiritual narratives became far more mainstream. And we almost take it for granted that that's happened, which I'll talk about in a moment. So waking up from false constructs of our societal programming or rejecting the left-right paradigm of politics, these are very materialistic things. This is not Piscean things. So, I woke up to injustices. Yeah, you're talking about injustices in society. You're not talking about waking up to what's within you. That's what the Piscean effect was. And so when I talk about woke, That term woke came from the original waking up term, or that waking up concept that originated with the Matrix film and the so-called truth community, the truthers of waking up to injustices or of deceptions. And so the core problem of woke, as I've talked about, is that they kind of stole that, and they say that woke is being woken up to physical characteristics, identity politics is the most important thing. Well, that is completely materialistic, and woke is extremely materialistic ideology that essentially doesn't have a soul. I've talked about that in other videos. And woke has become this unquestionable religion. But what the problem is, what they didn't do is take on a healthy Piscean quality of the spiritual dimension and the introversion, the power of introverting and contemplating, the ability to empower people from the inside out and to get in touch with the divinity within oneself in order to create a more purposeful life. That's what Neptune and Pisces help to do, to really dig deep into the ability for people to create meaning on a deep spiritual level and to seek fulfillment within that. So just exposing political corruption and seeing slavery in the international monetary system, okay, those are important things, but they're still materialistic topics. And the waking up process, the beginning of the waking up process are those materialistic things. But the deeper is going into your soul and finding out a spiritual understanding of that. And that's what the Piscean effect is. That's what Pisces is. And we've actually seen a large growth of this during this era. So what Neptune and Pisces did was to deepen individuals' ability to appreciate and connect with alternative narratives about who we are, where we come from, so ancient history and the narrative surrounding what our real history is, and also what it means to be self-empowered and why we've been taught to be victims, and why are we not powerful automatically. So people have really come to embrace these big spiritual topics. And there have been innumerable offshoots and communities and movements that are addressing these questions. And the major expansion of this more spiritualized way of seeing reality has been so big and comprehensive that people take it for granted. People, if you think back to before this Neptune and Pisces era, a lot of things just weren't as popular as they are today. So some examples are the massive and newfound awareness and acceptance of plant medicines such as ayahuasca. Back in the early 2010s, it was virtually unknown, and very, very unknown before 2010. But now it's become a major industry in South American countries. And it was a growing fad with hipsters in Brooklyn from about 2013 onwards. And it's become extremely popular and mainstream ever since. But plant medicines are a way for people to dive into their inner world and to heal traumas and to connect with reality from an inside-out way. And that is coming from the desire to do that, to have that Piscean introverted effect. Neptune is seeking deep connection with that, our ability to do that. You can take that pursuit in an unhealthy direction, like becoming addicted to doing those kinds of ceremonies or doing them way too much, or you can become disillusioned from it. There's a healthy way to do that. And so plant medicines and alternative medicine in general from ancient cultures have become extremely popularized and mainstream during Neptune and Pisces. And ayahuasca was just one. And another major industry, if you want to call it that, is Westerners moving to locations such as Bali or Costa Rica, Thailand, basically because it's less expensive. Those less expensive and underdeveloped countries are easier to make dollars, and you can spend it and live a luxurious life there. And you see this explosion in wellness retreats and all kinds of quote-unquote self-actualization programs that often involve psychedelics. And that's become a huge popularized industry, as I said, in this era. And that's what I mean when I say like the new New-Ageism. And also look at another example. Yoga as a daily practice has exploded in popularity. And yoga studios popping up all over the world, the Western world especially. So again, in 2025, most people have just become blasé to these major changes that have just become so ubiquitous in society. So this new age movement, it actually has gotten to the point of becoming a point of mockery, because there are so many ceremonies, there are all these self-help gurus who are not as spiritual as they make themselves out to be. And to me, they kind of amount to this upper class, neo-hippie subculture. But the underlying urge, I believe, in the collective is this collective desire to connect and experience spiritual transcendence and to contemplate these topics in new and creative ways. So Pisces is the sign of searching for more to life beyond the mundane and practical concerns that we all have. And another interesting movement is the rise, and especially in the past 5 to 7 years, what has been this renewed interest in Christianity, especially in young people. And on one hand, you have people joining for very spiritual reasons. They see the beauty in especially the Orthodox traditions of Christianity, this transcendence of the Latin Mass and of Christianity and the rich tradition of it. And people are not necessarily joining because of the doctrines or the minutiae of the catechism, the beliefs. So some people join for that. Other people see a broader need for us having a spiritual life. But there is a healthy expression of this Neptune and Pisces transit, is that people are taking on joining Christianity, but doing so for the doctrines. Why? Because it gives greater structure to their lives. And this is, again, that Pisces-Virgo axis, the balance between seeking spiritual transcendence, but also maintaining your feet on the ground. So what the hippies do, or the New Age neo-hippies, is that they're impractical, and they get kind of, I can't even think of what the word is. It's kind of hokey or corny when it comes to their ceremonies and spirituality. It just becomes detached and too lost in the idealism of it. But when you have your foot in reality and you're practical about how spiritual transcendence, what is it going to do to your life that makes important changes, that gives grounded structure to your life? That's what Christianity can do. It gives a structure, or any other religion that helps your life improve materially. So you get that balance between Pisces and Virgo, and you just don't go all in on diving into attempts for spiritual transcendence, totally introverted into yourself. Because it's not enough to have a spiritual awakening, which is Neptune stimulating Pisces. That spiritual consciousness needs to have a material outlet or a practical effect on your life. So without a healthy Pisces-Virgo axis, you get those hippies who are relishing their ceremonies, their psychedelics, and becoming essentially dependent on hallucinogenic plant medicines to solve all of their problems. And they don't get to work in the practical world and implement their spiritual lessons that they've learned in their daily lives. And so that rise in Christianity, the continuing rise in Christianity, gives the best of both of those worlds. And so essentially, you can't just keep living the same way after you've had a deep spiritual experience. So you can certainly see that with the growth of people buying land and getting back to nature as another very healthy way to get out of the matrix. You see the corruption, the spiritual and material corruption of the matrix, and the narratives, the false narratives that are just being sold and expanded, and the falsity of it all. Well, the practical solution is that going back and getting back to nature, getting back to the real skills that people used to have before modern society was created. So that movement of people going back and homesteading is a massively important aspect of the future world. And this healthy transit of Neptune and Pisces, one of the big results was this rise in homesteading and the desire to homestead, because when the narrative falls apart, which it eventually will, and come crashing down, the people who are questioning those narratives during this period of time, forming their own narratives in a healthy way, but then having the practical outlet to it, getting back to the land, that is the kind of ultimate expression of how the healthy expression and the healthy reaction to the Neptune and Pisces era played out. So in conclusion, Neptune and Pisces was this era began especially and turned into this deepening of isolation into private worlds and fantasy worlds where that became the norm. And the to each his own morality disintegrated principles and created very confusing, morally relativistic ethics. But at the same time, there was a resurgence and a desire to experience the divine and transcend this growing sense of isolation that modern society has been turning into. And Pisces is the final sign of the zodiac. It's the sign of a completion of a cycle. And we saw society drawn into such a world of illusion and fantasy, which is essentially drawn into the internet and social media, and the realization that this is not real life. Yet it became the means by which people were seeking greater meaning and connection in their lives. But it becoming so unfulfilling. And that's what the Piscean effect, that's what Neptune is doing. Seeking deep meaning in something, but you can't get total meaning from it, and you become disillusioned by it. That is a major kind of summary, you could say. We all dove into this world of social media and the narratives, creating our own personal narratives, and wanted our lives to be better for it. We wanted to create a fulfilling life from it. But we see the incompleteness of it, and it can't give us complete fulfillment. We needed to have a balance. We needed to always go back to our real life, the objective truth. We always needed to balance ourselves from that. So we've come out of the Neptune and Pisces era. And all of it was necessary because the next cycle that we're entering into, Neptune in Aries, is going to be much more about direct, conflict-based change when the rubber hits the road. And keep in mind, conflict isn't necessarily bad. And you could say, oh, this era we live in was an intense conflictual time as well. But we were living through an ideological kind of conflict. I like to call it the belief wars. And again, the era of the narrative. Now, the next era of Neptune and Pisces is when the narratives will collapse, either upon their own weight or implode, because they're not accurately depicting the reality on the ground. What is going to be the most important is direct, raw power. What can one do in one's own life in an immediate sense? It doesn't matter anymore what you believe. Beliefs are of the past. It's what you can do that matters, individually, but also groups of people. What can groups of people do specifically that betters their life in the immediate sense, discarding the importance of beliefs in subjective reality as a driving force to make change in one's life. So stay tuned for the next video about more in-depth predictions about what the next era of Neptune and Aries is going to be, and the important personal, societal, and geopolitical themes, what they can turn out to be. So we'll also be going into a little bit of history about the last Neptune and Aries transit, and also the last time Neptune was in one of Mars's signs, Scorpio, which was during the 1960s. Again, a time of major change and conflict. So stay tuned for the Neptune and Aries video, and please leave any comments about what you thought about these themes of Neptune and Pisces. And okay, we'll be looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you.